This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 378, the Friday, October 26th edition. We have pre-entries for the Breeders' Cup, always among the minds of USA horse players, what to do with all the European shippers. This is a specially designed podcast to help you answer that question. First up, we're going to have our old friend Nick Luck. You know him from the fine work he does at NBC, at the Breeders' Cup, and on his eponymous Luck on Sunday show, now available in podcast form. We're going to have him, and then a little bit later in the show, a one-on-one interview I did with Nick Godfrey, formerly the international editor of the Racing Post and author and award-winning Breeders' Cup journalist, and someone who, like me, writes about the Breeders' Cup for attheraces.com. Hopefully they will answer some of the frequently asked questions about this year's contingent of Irish, English, and French shippers. But before we get to our guests, I want to bring in the co-host with the most, Mr. Friday Night Lights. We call him that on another show. Here, he's the people's champion. He's from the planet Texas. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
It is upon us, and it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to the Breeders' Cup. Always a very exciting moment, and I don't know. I was actually thinking about this recently. I am creeping up upon my 15th of paying attention. 15th Breeders' Cup, maybe. I know I went to the Breeders' Cup when it was at Lone Star Park and I had no idea what I was looking at. I had no idea that I was watching Ghost Zapper run. I didn't know. I was just there. Trying some system out. I remember I was trying to come up with.
What was the system? Do you remember?
It was some bad figures. I honestly don't know where they were from. They probably don't even exist anymore. They were maybe it was like a I don't know, some figure that wasn't a good one. And I was taking the average of the three and then combining it with this other number and then just playing which horse had the highest. And I literally did not have one horse right.
It was a little tricky, as I recall. I think there were some big upsets. The Better Talk Now was that year. Wilco, right?
Singletary won.
Yes, that might have been my one winner, watching the boys from and girls from Little Red Feather celebrating before, during, and after the race. That was a great that was a great thing. Singletary, what a fine memory that is of Breeders' Cups past. Let me ask you a question, though, JK, about Breeders' Cup present, just very germane to the subject of this show. And we talked about this a little bit the other day, but when it comes to the European shippers, what are your main modes of analyzing them from this stage, now that we have pre-entries, all the way to when the horses enter the starting gate for the Breeders' Cup races themselves?
I can think back to every year that I've been participating in the Breeders' Cup, and I've used a European horse based on listening to Nick Luck talking on Steve Bick. And luckily enough, I'm going to selfishly be able to ask the questions that I really want to ask here in a couple of minutes. So that's always one of the first steps I do, is I'll listen through it. I'll listen to it. And then I'll listen to it again and jot down some of the notes that he says. He'll throw out at you. Right. He'll throw a lot of stuff at you when it comes to ground and trip and post position. So those are definitely listening to Nick is one of my favorite things to do. The second thing I'll do is as you know, recently is I'll go through Timeform US, and when you click on where the running lines typically are for American racing, you'll get, when I say paragraphs about horses. If you look at Enable's last race in the Arc, you literally get 300 plus words about the race, the trip, coming into it, coming out of it. So you can really get a lot of stuff, especially with the younger horses. Those Timeform notes will say, will say things like the trainer suggests we'll need more ground. It'll let you know if Lasix is going to be needed, if they wanted soft or firm. There's a lot of clues in there when you look through the Timeform. And it's much easier to navigate than it did, one of my other moves, which is just to Google Enable horse and read news articles about Enable. So those are the things that I use to prepare. And and see what I need to learn about the Europeans that are coming over.
All good ideas, and you'll be able to find plenty of video. These big Group 1 races that are many of the key preps, you're going to be able to find most of what you need to find right on YouTube. And I do recommend watching, but those time form notes that JK mentions, also notable in that they're going to point out a lot of times when a horse has that trouble in running. There's going to be, I guarantee you, a couple of instances of our guests today pointing out trips where you might just look at the form and see where a horse finished in a race, and that's not going to tell the whole story. There's going to be important trips on some of these horses coming over. Timeform can help you point to them. Our guests can. JK also mentioned Nick Luck's appearances, regular appearances on the other At the Races, not the TV in the UK, but the radio show here, the At the Races with Steve Bick. That is a phenomenal resource. Nick, we have for a limited amount of time today. You'll have him for much longer on the Bick Show. You should already, along with having your podcast listening device, download every episode of the DRF Players Podcast. You should be downloading every episode of The Bick Show as well. So many great guests. There is a little bit of a letdown usually about 9:20 on Wednesday mornings on the show. You may want to go get a cup of coffee then or something. But normally speaking, the quality of guests is amazing, and all the more so when it comes to the preparation for the Breeders' Cup. You're going to get clocking information. You're going to get information on the Europeans. You're going to be talking. You're going to get virtual stable tours from American horsemen. I can't emphasize enough how much, in addition to the fantastic coverage you're going to find over at DRF.com and in the pages of Daily Racing Form, which you should obviously also be checking out, how important that Bick Show can be as well. SteveBick.com to download those episodes. I can only imagine you want to underline a little bit of what I'm talking about, JK, because I know you use all those resources, Daily Racing Form and the Bick Show as well.
Big fan. Was instrumental in my involvement in the game, just really learning and hearing different handicappers and perspectives. So always, it's my favorite thing is to go to the broadcast archives and just look for the names of the guys that I might have missed live and just listen back to those little pieces. It's easy to pull up on the phone and listen to while driving and or like in a plane. There's a lot of travel going on when the Breeders' Cup comes up, so that's definitely one of the things I like to do. The other thing I'm going to do in the background of my handicapping is I watched the first episode of this Breeders' Cup show where it's kind of like the 24/7 version of Breeders' Cup. So I watched episode 1. I believe 2, 3, and 4 came out on Wednesday, and so hopefully I'm going to try to watch those in between while I'm flying or sitting in an airport or in an Uber where I often find myself.
Uber life for JK. Let's talk about the show for a minute, JK. You said you watched the pilot. You made the comparison to the 24/7. What is it like stylistically, and what can folks look forward to when they check out this new cool show from the Breeders' Cup?
That's what it feels like. It feels like 24/7. The first episode I watched was obviously episode 1, where they were following the contenders of the Stephen Foster. So they were following Brendan Walsh and Honorable Duty and the always entertaining Ken Ramsey and Backyard Heaven, where he was sitting in the backyard of his home in Saratoga at the Oklahoma, handing out cantaloupes and saying morning, morning to everybody. So that was entertaining as ever. Also got to hear our buddy Travis Stone with the call and see the race, and it was entertaining. So I love those behind the scenes vibes. It actually felt a little bit like a show that we've talked about before, the Road to the Roses, or whatever the movie was that they did when Barbaro was on the Kentucky Derby Trail.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, the Hennigan brothers. It was called oh, come on, brain. It did have roses in the name. We'll look that up quickly. I want to make sure we get that name right, because that's worth taking a look at if you haven't seen it, fellow Brooklynites too. So props for that. But the behind the scenes aspect is interesting. Do you find ever watching that type of stuff about racing that you might get anything that helps you in your handicapping, or is it more helping you as a fan?
Well, since there's only one episode, I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine that there happens to be some nuggets and pieces in there. It just, the first episode, there wasn't really anything. It wasn't as if like they let you know why Backyard Heaven ran so poorly. I mean, obviously he's not relevant to the Breeders' Cup conversation now, but he's just the example I have from episode 1. You know, Irad told Kenny he just wasn't there today, and you know he didn't. So, and then, you know, honorable duty and so on and so forth. I'm sure there will be some clues along the line. I'm looking forward to some of the other winning your in races where you know, other horses might not have ran as well. I'm not sure if the Jockey Club Gold Cup is going to be an episode, but would love to hear what some behind the scenes when it comes to Mendelssohn. So we'll just see. I'm looking forward to watching the rest of the episodes. And anytime our sport can be presented from different angles in a positive light, like where do I sign up, right? I'm good with it. So looking forward to watching the rest of those.
The first Saturday in May, JK, that's the name of that Hennigan Brothers doc. Before we get into the meat of the guests on the show, get a couple more minutes. Hey, let's make this thing an hour. Why not? I wanted to talk to you about how much work you do at this stage. Now that we have the pre-entries, there's still these questions about the draw. There's still these questions about who's going to go where in terms of cross-entered horses, etc. How important is this part of your handicapping for the Breeders' Cup?
I've done it both ways, where I'm like pre-entries come out and I'm like full meal deal handicap guy. And I've done it where I wait till the pre-entries are out. Till the final entries where they draw. Look, you're gonna get the full meal deal on Monday when they draw, and you know where they're at, and you know who's in the race, and you see the post positions, you see the final works, you see all of those things. I just think that it's a little bit overkill. It can lead you down bad paths if you start too soon. Now look, if there's a race you're particularly interested in, hop in there, look at the pre-entries, watch some replays, you know, peruse through the PPs. But if you have a workflow that you do where you write something in, you fill in this, you fill in that, you circle this, you highlight that, I would wait until Monday and gather as much of this information you can over these days to kind of get a pre-vibe about what's going on. But I wouldn't get carried away.
How important is this sort of last-minute workout type information to you? Typically, you're a player who incorporates workouts quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that it's important to remember, and you have a really good sprinter one that I'll let you talk about, but it's important to remember that a couple things, and this applies all the time. When you see these turf horses working on the dirt, don't let negative works on the dirt impact them. They're just maintenance type works where they didn't want to put them on the turf for whatever reason there is. The other thing is they're all good horses, so they're all going to work good. This is the Breeders' Cup. It's not the 4th at so-and-so park on a Wednesday, right? So all of these horses are going to work well. Some are going to work worse than others. But try to find a pattern when you can identify a horse that's always working well, who's not working well, and just let it be a clue to you, but do not get carried away with the works.
I like that. And I think the point you're making about the sprinters, there have been multiple Breeders' Cups where the ultimate winner of the Breeders' Cup sprint, I had reliable people, not people who are out there clocking once a year, people who know horseflesh, talk to me about how banged up and sore those horses looked. I think something about the nature of the enterprise and the dead sprint and what they have to do, it does not matter to me anymore in that division how a horse is supposedly looking that week. So that is a good one to pass along. Don't want to make you give away the store, but any current thought on how you're going to approach this year's Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, JK?
I'm either going to have 50 at the end of day one, or I'm going to be trying to sneak into Jeff Ruby and sleeping in a little bit on Saturday.
All right, a little bit of a clue there. Clearly there's a baby that JK is interested in. All right, our guests are ready, JK. Let's bring them in. Welcome back to the DRF Players Podcast, Nick Luck. Nick, how are you today?
I'm extremely well. Just trying to get my head around this myriad of pre-entry stage frenzied excitement.
what was the biggest surprise for you in the pre-entries that came down just a few hours ago as we're recording this?
I don't think there are too many surprises because it was quite widely signalled that there would be a massive entry from Europe. And I saw the details of some of the horses that weren't Ballydoyle or Godolphin already lined up to come. So I knew that it would be a huge number from Europe. So not a massive surprise. I am slightly surprised, pleasantly surprised by one or two of the Aidan O'Brien horses that have made it in. Anthony Van Dyke being the obvious one in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. I didn't think he was going to come. And I was interested that they put first preference for the turf, the 1.5 mile turf for Magical, who was so impressive on British Champions Day against the Chad quintet in the filly and mare turf. I wonder if they've got half an eye on that and think, not sure we want to take him on our own game.
Interesting read. Well, let's start with Enable. And we've talked about Enable earlier in the year with you, but just curious what you think of her entry, what you think of her chances, and just the storyline that it would represent should she get victory in the Breeders' Cup Turf.
Take it in that order. Entry, fantastic, obviously. And even when it was mooted, I thought it unlikely. So then when it became a likelihood after the Arc, I thought, great. Yeah, real headline horse. As somebody put it to me today, I think it was Lafitte Pink Eye put it to me today, if you were to produce your brochure for the Breeders' Cup now, she would be your cover girl, and quite rightly so. Her chances were obviously very good. She's the most talented filly in the race. She gets the filly's allowance, and she comes here off the back of a light campaign. And there will be much made storyline-wise of whether she can become the first horse to win the Arc de Triomphe and the Breeders' Cup Turf in the same season. And there will be plenty of people who follow trends. I use that word advisedly. They're trends, not statistics. Trends will suggest to people that she can't do both. But a couple of colleagues and I have been working on this, and it doesn't take a genius to flick back through the history books and realise that no fewer than 12 Breeders' Cup Turf winners had previously run in that season's Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, and they weren't just also runs having a tiddly round. They were horses that had been in the heat of the battle and finishing second, third, and fourth. So I don't see that in and of itself as a massive negative.
Excellent. JK, I know you have some questions for Nick. We'll let you jump in with a couple here.
Well, I'll be honest. I was a little bit disappointed when I heard that you were going to quote Lafitte Pink Eye, and then you didn't do it in your impersonation of him.
I put it to bed. I'm trying to claw back some brownie points with the great man.
Look, one of the races, selfishly, I'm the most interested in getting your perspective on is a race that I anticipate being extremely involved in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, and that's the Juvenile Fillies Turf. I'm a big fan of this newspaper of record, and I need to know if I need to be afraid of anything coming from over the sea.
I think Newspaper of Record is a very, very good filly, and she comes from a pedigree that has had an amazing season. It's a pedigree created by Alan Belshaw from Times of Wigan. They raced a very good 2-year-old years ago called Timeless Times, who was the record-breaking 2-year-old for wins in a season. I think notched up 16 wins in his 2-year-old season, but I'm digressing. Subsequently, they've had a very good pedigree that has come alive this season, thanks to the exploits of La Trobe, first of all, then the Stakes Place Classical Times, and now this Newspaper of Record, who Chad Brown thinks is the real deal. I wouldn't put you off her at all. What do I think of the overall standard of European juvenile fillies? Not brilliant. I don't think it's an outstanding crop on what we've seen so far. But if there is one really good one that's likely to come to the Breeders' Cup, it's just wonderful for Aidan O'Brien. Now, he's not won this race, and it's not a race in which Europe has a particularly good record, but this is a proper filly. She's got proper pedigree. She's out of a filly called Wading, who herself is out of Cherry Hinton, which makes from the family of Galileo and See the Stars. But what I think she does want is a decent racing surface, and with 50%, 60% chances of rain in Louisville at the back end of next week, I worry about that for her chance. So I'd like Just Wonderful in this race of the Europeans if the ground comes up as we'd like it to, i.e. quick and consistent.
I wanted to jump in and ask you about the Breeders' Cup Mile, Nick, specifically Expert Eye, who I was very interested in based on the performance on USA-like ground at Ascot this year. However, as you predict, with the softness in the turf, a distinct possibility. Is that something that might hamper expert eyes' chances? And what do you think of the horse in general?
Well, I think it would hamper his chances insofar as is he going to stay a mile, to truly run a mile on soft ground? He's by acclamation. Many of his progeny do run quite well on soft ground, but he's a horse with an explosive turn of foot. That's his key strength. His signature performances thus far have come last year at Goodwood and this year at Royal Ascot, and both those performances have come over 7 furlongs. So I'd quite like him in the race because I like a horse with a little bit of speed and a turn of foot in the race. And although he's not won a Grade 1, he's got the class to win one. I would just be worried about that. His strengths being slightly blunted if the ground turns up soft. So he's another one I wouldn't want soft ground for.
Actually, JK, before I let you get to your next one, just curious for any other thoughts you might have, Nick, on the group lined up for the mile.
I think it's an interesting race because there's no standout from the United States, and you could argue there's no standout for Europe. I think it's one of those races. If you really have a strong view, you could probably make yourself quite a lot of money here. There's going to be plenty of money for Polly Dream, I suspect, because she represents the Goldacova connection. She's a lightly raced filly. She gets all the allowances. She comes off a ridiculous run in France in the Prix La Forêt, where she essentially finished mid-pack on the bridle because she never got a run, so it was completely inconclusive. But we know enough about her to know that she ought to be competitive against this group. And she's also got that run style and that tactical speed to be able to hack it here. And Freddie Head knows everything about winning the Breeders' Cup Mile, having won it twice as a jockey with Miesque and 3 times as a trainer with Goldacova. So she's going to take a load of money. They're all interesting, the European horses, I think, for different reasons. Gustav Klimt, they're trying to make him into a stallion, the Ballydoyle team. He's not really come up to scratch this season, but he should run another consistent race. And back up to a mile should suit. Happiley's in here, which is interesting. The filly, she only went down to Lawrence by a head at Newmarket in the Sun Chariot. That form would make her competitive. She didn't go in the stalls the other day at Ascot, so she hasn't had a run. I Can Fly ran off her face the other day, and she's earned herself a ticket on the plane. Lightning Spear 7 now, and probably deliberately didn't have a hard time at Ascot because the ground was too soft for him. One Master's owned by the Jacksons. And it represents William Haggis, who's never had Breeders' Cup runners before, but it's been a marquee season for him. So they're all interesting horses, but I wouldn't say one necessarily lays over all the others.
When it comes to the Classic, we usually get one European type. It looks like we're going to have 3 here. The last time we had you on, you and I both kind of agreed that we haven't learned everything we need to learn about Mendelssohn, and I think we learned a lot more. And I wanted to get your take on what your conclusion was of his Jockey Club Gold Cup. And then what do you think about Roaring Lion's chances on the dirt?
We'll take it in that order. I think you and I, JK, are 2 of the more paid-up members of the Mendelssohn fan club. Quite like his chance here in an open year and not necessarily a stellar year. He ran a huge race for a 3-year-old in that. And if he moves forward from it rather than recoils from it, and that's the big if, then you'd like his chance. I was just interested in the way that he was pressing him through that race, where I'm always kind of pressing him to take hold of the bridle through the mid part of the race. And people said, well, he's gone too quick chasing Diversify. But I wonder whether he felt as a rider, and I used to ask him about this, that if he just laid up on him a bit, whether the horse would have really taken him into the race. I wonder whether he was just pressing him to get him to try and take him a bit more, just take the bridle a bit more and travel that bit more sweetly. I don't know. I'll have to talk to him about that and see. One pace analysis of the race actually has Thunder Snow on top anyway, and I think probably we oughtn't to underestimate Thunder Snow, even though he has perhaps a less sexy profile. And of course, you know what I'm going to say next. If it rains, I don't like either of them very much, judging on what they've both done on a rainy track in Kentucky before. So, yeah, I think we need a dry track for either of those two to show their best. And the interesting one is Roaring Lion. It's quite a simple equation, really. If he translates the best of his ability onto a different surface, then he wins. Simple as that. If he translates the best of his ability, he is better than all of these. Does he move like a dirt horse? Not really. But what he did show the other day was that he can face adverse circumstances and now has the tenacity to overcome them. And the interesting point is that he's run 8 times this season. He's had a busy season, and he keeps coming back for more. He is as hard as nails. He's got that toughness, that sort of Giant's Causeway declaration of war toughness that might see him still competitive. Gosden's talked about the kickback today, and that's a very fair point. But if he can stay out of that and he can roll and he can stay competitive, then we know he's got the class. So I've no idea whether he's going to handle dirt. There's not really any clue in his pedigree that he will. You know better than me the record of horses by Kitten's Joy on the turf. Yes, his damn size, street sense, but is there much dirt in his pedigree? Not really. So it's a guess.
If you were given the assignment to place Roaring Lion at this year's Breeders' Cup, which race would you have chosen?
I would choose the Classic for one pretty obvious reason, and that is that he is going to retire after the Breeders' Cup, come what may. It's a shot to nothing. Do I think that he's going to beat Enable over 1.5 miles, or beat a pretty competitive group, I should say, over 1.5 miles? Not necessarily, because all his best form has come shy of 1.5 miles, and don't forget, he didn't stay the trip in the Derby. So I wouldn't want to be running him in a Breeders' Cup turf if it's the last run of his career against A, a very strong group of horses, and B, in a race where he's not necessarily going to be suited by the distance, because they're not going to go fast enough for him. He's not going to be able to use his cruising speed and his turn of foot. So I can see, I would run him in the Classic. I would roll the dice and have a go. I think it's a bit of a no-brainer. Plus, as far as his stallion value is concerned, that is completely assured. He's won Europe's 3 most important prizes at 10 furlongs, all age prizes: the Eclipse, the International, and the Irish Champion Stakes. And he's now won a Group 1 over 1 mile as an older horse as well. And he's finished second in a Group 1 over 1 mile as a 2-year-old. So he's got every single tick in every box as a stallion prospect. He hasn't got the best pedigree in the stud book, but it's pretty good, and he's by a good stallion. So yeah, I would definitely have a shot at this. So I think it's a kind of a shot to nothing, provided that he comes back safe.
Makes sense. Let's talk quickly about the filly and mare turf. Who do you have your eye on in here?
Well, as I said, the Aidan O'Brien factor is key here, I think, against the Chad Brown quintet. And the fact that I wonder whether he's going to run Magical in the turf. I suppose he is, because I suppose he wants to split them up. I think Magical would be tough here if she ran. But Magic Wand is a good filly. A Magic Wand, I think, is ground contingent. Magical, not so much. Athena was good in, I'm going to argue, modest races relative to these earlier in the season, but I don't think she's good enough to win this. And then you've got the Chads. And when you've got that many horses in a race, you can control it to a certain extent, much as Aidan can much of the time in Europe. So I think Chad holds the cards. The Europeans, Magic Wand and Wild Illusion, I think, are the ones you need to be interested in.
And for the uninitiated, you mentioned Magic Wand having a ground preference.
Fast.
There you go.
I think. Certainly her Ribblesdale victory at Ascot tells us that she wants it as quick as possible. And I think the slower it is, again, she's a filly who's sharply quickened to the front on her last couple of starts and then just been found wanting when she's got there. Now, either she wants a perfectly timed challenge or her stamina just ebbs away late, and I suspect it might be the latter. So if it's a tactical race and she's able to deploy her acceleration on a sound surface at the right point, then I think she's going to be competitive. If it's end to end, I'd worry a little bit.
We've got 1 more minute with Nick. JK, do you have a final quick one for him?
No, I think that he kind of tipped his hand a little bit that he doesn't really feel that the trend is something to be concerned about when it comes to Enable. I think that's probably the European horse that people are going to have the most questions about, because it's it's probably a single for most, or it's not. So
well, the thing is, I'm not going to be dogmatic, and I'm not going to start roaring around the ground saying, yeah, she's an absolute certainty. All she's got to do is go down to the gate and come back, because it's not to do with the arc trend. It's just, I think that it's a strong group of horses. I don't think the American horses should be completely discounted. Channel Maker and Robert Bruce. Yeah, that's home advantage. They know how to run these tracks. They've done very well. I thought Channel Maker was really impressive at Belmont. So I don't think they're completely out of it. And it's a strong group of Europeans against her. Crystal Ocean is a very good horse. Those Longines world rankings, scoffed at by some, but not by me, still have Crystal Ocean's racing pretty high up there, third or fourth best in the world. 1.5 miles is going to suit him down to the ground. He's a very straightforward horse for a trainer who's won the race 4 times. Waldgeist is a horse who I was incredibly impressed with at St. Cloud earlier in the season and again at Longchamp on Arc Trials Day. And although he ran really well behind an Abel when fourth in the Arc, I was a little bit disappointed. I think he can do better than that. And if he circles back to the form of the previous start, I think he's a player. You've got last year's winner Talismanic for all he's been out of form. That's a good clutch of horses. And if Aidan Sling's Magical in there, who's really in form now and was very impressive when beating bang-in form Phillies Coronet and Latidar the other day, you've got a proper horse race for the turf. So it's not so much the fact that I think she can't win because she's won the Art. It's just because I think she's got just as much on her plate class-wise as she did 3 weeks ago.
All right, Nick, we've kept you a little longer than we even said. I know you got a lot to do, very busy day. We really appreciate you taking the time out to come back on the podcast and look forward to hanging out with you soon.
It's always a pleasure. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome to the DRF Players Podcast a very special guest. You might know him. He is the former international editor from the Racing Post. He's an acclaimed author. He's written 2 books, including On the Racing Road and Postcards from the World of Horse Racing. He is an award-winning writer at that, winning the Joe Hirsch Award for great writing about the Breeders' Cup for a piece about Zenyatta back in the day. These days, he is appearing where I'm appearing, covering the Breeders' Cup for At the Races on the channel and also over at attheraces.com. Welcome to the podcast, Nick Godfrey. Nick, how are you?
Very well. Well, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, we have the pre-entries now. So my thought was, in past years, we've done our sort of European analysis show closer to the Cup. I thought it might be fun to bring in a couple of European form experts a little bit earlier in the process, before the final draw, to talk about some of the headlines, to talk about some of the top contenders who are going to be appearing at this year's Breeders' Cup. In general, how would you describe this year's contingent?
Well, it's strong. There's no two ways about it. I mean, it's in both quality and quantity. I mean, it's a record number for a start. I mean, Aidan O'Brien's got more horses there than anybody else. His record at the Breeders' Cup is, incidentally, I always find a thing of great interest because it's quite patchy in many ways. But whatever, he's got loads of runners. We've got, then we've got the Arc winner. We've got the best 3-year-old in Europe in Roaring Lion. It's really quite deep.
Let's start by talking about the Juvenile Turf Sprint, a new race, which I think the genesis of it in many ways was with the idea of attracting European entrants. Who are the horses in here who you think American punters should really be working to familiarize themselves with at this stage of the game?
Well, I think they really need to, because with the pre-entries, half the field, 6 of the 12 are coming from Europe, aren't they? And I mean, I think this is one race that's going to go to Europe, frankly. The race that this has sort of succeeded, the Del Mar race last year that wasn't a Breeders' Cup race, well, it was 1, 2, 3, 4 for the visitors. And I can't see that much difference this year, although I'm obviously very nervous of Wesley Ward back in his own backyard. But Shang's Royal Ascot form isn't as good as the Europeans that are coming. We'll start with Sergio Prokofiev, who was supposed to be a very good horse earlier in the year for Aidan O'Brien, and kind of lost his way a bit. But the other day at Newmarket in a Group 3 race called the Cornwallis Stakes over 5 furlongs, beating 2 of these horses who are also likely to run in Well Done Fox was second, and Pocket Dynamo, who's one we can talk about in a minute, who got no sort of run. But Sergio Prokofiev came with a really good late run, just the sort that I could see with a fair wind around Churchill Downs, coming with a sort of run off of strong pace. He desperately needs a strong pace. He's been running over further. He can be headstrong. But I do feel that he's going to be a very strong contender. Of course, Aidan did win that race I was talking about at Del Mar last year with Declaration of Peace, who came right down the outside from virtually last to first, if I remember rightly. Now, Sergei Prokofiev brings a real touch of class, I think, to this race, and to say that late run could really suit this race. I mean, obviously, if 5.5 furlongs hurtling around Churchill Downs is going to be quite hard to predict. All sorts of things could go wrong. But I mean, he's by no means the only one. I mean, Soldier's Call is somebody who American punters really must have a look at, because I mean he ran, which would be unheard of, I think, in America. His last run as a 2-year-old was in the Prix de l'Abbé, which is almost a championship 5 furlong sprint at Longchamp. It's the 5 furlong Group 1 on Arc Day, and he led till virtually on the line. Now, the thing is, they get loads of weight, 2-year-olds, when they're running against their elders, but there's no doubt that this is a really fast, classy horse. I mean, he's really fast. I mean, our horses sometimes don't get out the stalls in America because, I mean, obviously most American horses are trained so brilliantly, they're just out like a shot from a gun. But Soldier's Call led older horses in the Abbey till virtually on the line, just gets beaten, finishes third. I mean, if he could reproduce that, I mean, you know, clearly he's going to be a player. So, you know, these are good horses. I mean, this race is made really for the visitors.
I tend to agree, and I wouldn't let the lack of success that the European sprinters have had in the proper the regular turf sprint necessarily put you off backing an English or Irish or French runner in the juvenile race. Speaking of juvenile races, let's take a quick look through the field for the juvenile turf and the juvenile turf fillies.
Well, can I just stop you quickly, because I've mentioned the two obvious ones in that last one, but there is one that will slip under the radar in the States, I'm sure. I mean, on the Daily Racing Form's first morning line, he's in at 15-1. He's going to be a lot shorter in England. It's the horse I mentioned called Pocket Dynamo, who's trained by somebody who won't be familiar to American race fans, Robert Cowell. Now, he's a sprint king. He trains lots of really good sprinters. Doesn't have many sort of big money bags owners, although this is owned by Phoenix Thoroughbreds. And he was talking about Breeders' Cup for this horse, this race, after he was short-headed, after he came second to Shang at Royal Ascot. So he'd been looking at this for a long time. This is not some afterthought, which is sometimes the case with Europeans, and they leave things behind. Now, you look at his last one and think, well, how can this horse possibly win? He finished fifth in the Cornwallis behind Sergio Prokofiev, and he's never going to turn that round. And I'm not saying he will, because I was impressed with Sergio Prokofiev, but I'm telling you one thing, he got absolutely no run whatsoever. He was bottled up. I actually backed him that day. He was completely bottled up, and I expect him to run a big race, and he could just be one of those that slips in right under the radar.
Oh, that's a great word. Thank you for making sure to underline that. My bad for not picking up on the cue when you mentioned him earlier, but it's always good to have one like that. I think sometimes those trip angles can fall through the cracks for American punters, and that's exactly why we're doing this episode. So thank you. Thanks for that. And let's move along to talk about the other two juvenile races as well. Any strong fancies in there?
Well, yeah. Again, I mean, I'm aware more than most that it's not as simple as just showing up, even if the races look like they're framed for European horses. First of all, in the turf fillies, obviously I'm completely in awe of Chad Brown's record with some of these turf horses, and I would probably suggest a newspaper of record. But you're interested in Europeans here. There is one again that may just be one that doesn't get a lot of play. A filly called East, who's trained by Kevin Ryan, who's had Group 1 winners, but she's only had the 2 runs. One little race at Hamilton in Scotland at the end of September, then goes to France and wins a Group 3. Wins it really, really well. So she's unbeaten, and she just looked very useful. And according to sort of Racing Post ratings, our own form lines over here, she's not she's not really not that far off the more obvious sort of Group 1 horses like Just Wonderful, who won a Group 3 at Newmarket last time, and Hermosa, who was favourite for the Group 1 Fillies Mile at Ascot. So I'd be interested in East at what I'd imagine to be a decent price. But as I say, I do fear newspaper of record, given that this is a race that does stay at home quite a lot. On the other hand, with the Colts now, this is one that tends to be won by a European, and we've got some, we've certainly got some likely suspects in there, headed by Anthony Van Dyke for Aidan O'Brien, who's won this 4 times. This is a race he wins. In fact, he basically wins the juvenile turf for males. He's never won the fillies and the turf. That's almost his record at the Breeders' Cup. It's only Johannesburg other than that, I think. But anyway, Anthony Van Dyke, up in trip to a mile again. He slipped slightly down the pecking order in Europe, finishing 3rd in the Dewhurst Stakes, our sort of 2-year-old championship. But the fact remains he's bringing proper European Group 1 form in, so he's going to be quite a tough one to crack. And his stablemate Broome, again, he's beaten the neck in the Group 1 in France at the Art Weekend. So we're dealing with top grade Europeans here, and I would looking that the Americans don't look that strong to me in the male 2-year-old turf division again. The loss of Fog of War makes a difference, doesn't it? So I think that, of these, I think that again the juvenile turf could be one that we're going to collect, and we're bringing some strong form here.
Makes perfect sense, and we've seen the Dewhurst be a key pointer with Lancaster Bomber and Mendelssohn, of course, being also rans there and coming on to taste Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf glory. So. Yeah,
well, that's absolutely true, but Anthony Van Dyke would have been higher rated than either of those horses going into the Dewhurst. It's both on reputation and on what he'd done. So, he I mean, a lot of people, including me, thought he might win the Dewhurst, and that was won by a horse called Two Darn Holt, who's favourite for our classics next year, and looked an absolute superstar. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he should have won it, but he ran a solid enough race. And Son of Galileo, he's likely to. I can just see. I mean, the stretch out to a mile and around an American tight American Oval isn't really much from a 7 furlongs at Newmarket, but I can just see him running. I think he just brings class. So, but even if he doesn't, there are others who are equally, solid animals. So I think it's going to take a lot for the home team to keep that one at home.
Looking through the past performances of the contenders for the filly and mare turf, Wild Illusion seems to have, if you showed the historical PPs of the filly and mare turf winners, Wild Illusion's PP looks like several of those. Is it as simple as her in there, or do you have some others that you're interested in?
Well, from a European perspective, I think Wild Illusion is indeed the one you'd really be looking at. I mean, she's favourite over here for a good reason. I mean, Charlie Appleby, of course, won it last, having wonderful season again. Won it last year with Wuheda. This one comes in with better credentials than Wuheda. I mean, she was second in the Oaks, but she's just it's almost as if 1 mile 3 furlongs is a perfect trip, given that she's wins over a mile and a half, wins over a mile and a quarter. She's versatile like that, and she has been aimed for this for a while. Won in France recently, beating Magic Wand from Ballydoyle, who's likely to be in this race as well. I would have been interested in Magical if she was running in this race, but I'd note that the turf is her first preference, because she looked really good, having had an interrupted season. She rounded into prime form and looked really good at the weekend. And Aidan O'Brien don't seem to have that much trouble bringing them round again. But again, his record with fillies at the Breeders' Cup is atrocious. I mean, Found won the turf, but he's never won a fillies race. So, that would put me off. So yes, I think Wild Illusion is clearly the number one visitor. But I have to be honest with you here, V. I've had a bet on 4-Star Crook.
Team Chad Brown for you.
Yeah, absolutely, and I just over here. I don't know what the morning line's going to say over there, but over here, she was double figures after her last win at Belmont, and I can't see that there's very much between her and Sister Charlie, who was at the time favourite over here. So I just thought they were very similar fillies, and 4-Star Crook with that lovely late run that she has was a massive price here. So I just thought each way it was and we knew she was going to run. I thought it was a decent bet. But yeah, I think Wild Illusion is a very solid contender.
Makes perfect sense. Your bet makes perfect sense looking at the PPs. I mean, she's always been less hyped, but has always been right there and has upset some of the Brown favorites at other points. And Brown's also won some Breeders' Cup races with less fancied horses in the betting in the past too. So there's a lot of things going in your favor with that one. Now, this year's crop of European milers, not awesome by their own lofty standards, but is the form on offer that's coming over here still going to be likely good enough to give this one to your team? What are your thoughts on the Breeders' Cup Mile?
Well, it's difficult, this, because yes, there are good horses coming across, but we know the Breeders' Cup Mile can be a bit of a crapshoot, can't it? I mean, with 14 runners hurtling around there, and the European record is nowhere near as good as you'd think it should be for the level of horses that are coming over. I mean, Britain has had one winner. I mean, one winner, given the horses we bring over, which was the recently retired Luca Comani's Barathea in 1994. Ireland's had 2 and not had one since Ridgewood Pearl in 95. So we're going, this is a long time since we've had a winner with any of those. But the French, of course, have a fantastic record in this race. Goldikova 3 times, Miesque, these are great fillies. Both associated with Freddie Head, either riding or training, and he's saddling the one that I like from Europe, which is Polydream. who has been winning over shorter distances, won a Group 1 at 7 furlongs in the summer. Then got, again, absolutely another one of these sort of trip note horses, got no run whatsoever in the race at over the Arc weekend. Against another horse who's running here, One Master, who was a big price to win that race, was 33-1 the winner there, I think. So it shows that it was a bit of a shock. But Polly Dream, we can just forget the latest run, and then you're looking at the sort of horse I like in this race. The other extended sprinters have always done quite well. I've found over the years in the Breeders' Mile, horses won 7 furlongs in Europe tend to have the sort of turn of foot that's necessary. So again, that would be the one I'd be looking at. But these other ones, Expert Eye, another looks especially 7 furlong horse to me for Sir Michael Stout. Lightning Spear's been around a long time and is a solid horse. So yeah, these are good horses. But I would say that given our record in this race isn't as strong as you really imagine it. Yes, these are good horses, but I don't think they're as formidable. So I'm stumbling over my words. As I've seen some commentators in America suggesting, because I don't think you're that fond of your own mile crop. I'd be very interested in Oscar Performance, who I've consistently avoided, thinking he can't get in the soft lead again, and yet he just keeps doing it.
Is there anything on the European team who you think might give him any kind of run early, or do you imagine he might be out there by himself again this time for Oscar Performance?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, most of these horses are more likely to come from off the pace, and it would take a very brave European jockey to send one of these from the start, given that I can see them, most of them come with a late run. Polydream certainly does. So the short answer is no. I'm not sure about that. I mean, they're good horses, but I mean, whether you'd want to put them on the front. I mean, Ballydoyle, Aidan O'Brien, they usually have come in mob-handed, so it's possible who have they got in the race? Gustav Klimt, Happily, and I Can Fly are in the field. They could do something to mess him up. They love running spoilers or horses to make their own pace. That's possible. Maybe that'd be the way you'd be looking with one of the lesser fancied animals, like Happily, for example, who's a good filly, but is finding it very hard to win. I mean, I Can Fly ran a blinding race at the weekend in very heavy ground at Ascot, but has won on faster, but has never shown anything to suggest she's up to this class otherwise. But yeah, I could see them doing something to try and mess up Oscar Performance for their other horses if it looks like nothing's going to go up there from the States. But yes, he's one I like. I'd never get him right. As I say, I've opposed him at 2, 3, and 4. I opposed him in print as a 2-year-old at the Breeders' Cup because I thought he couldn't possibly get over there and make. What did he do? I just always get him wrong, so I'm probably going to jump on him now and be wrong. But but I would, of the Europeans again, Polydream is one of those that, while the connections, Freddie Hebb will jump out. He's got a 7 next to. He's got for the last run 7th. Doesn't look great that against 7th behind a horse who's going to be quite a big price itself with One Master. So she's 7th behind One Master, who was 33-1 to win that race in France. Gustav Klimt, who's running, was 4th. You'd think that can't be. That's not the sort of form that's going to come into a Breeders' Cup and win, is it? But as I say, just ignore it. That run was very unlucky, and otherwise, Polydream's got the sort of form that makes her a big player.
Great notes there. Let's talk about Enable. We've given Enable some time on the podcast, but would love your perspective on how good she is and an overview of the others who will be coming over to take a tilt at the Breeders' Cup turf. Well,
there are many different questions to be answered with Enable. The first one is that how good she is, as you have asked me, and she's brilliant. She's obviously a fantastic filly. She hasn't shown the level of form this year that she had last year yet, but she still won the Arc despite not being completely fit. She hadn't raced this year until September, and then it's a very unusual preparation for an Arc runner to be running at Kempton on the synthetic track against Crystal Ocean. Will be up against her again, incidentally. But then she goes to the Arc having had a temperature and missed a piece of work. Brilliant to win the Arc. So she's a brilliant filly. I love her. I think she's fantastic. But it's not the same as saying I'd want to bet on her to win the Breeders' Cup. Is she beatable? Well, I'm determined not to say this. I'm going to say it, but I'm not going to stand behind it saying, well, if she brings her best form, then she wins. Well, of course she does. Any fool can see that. But there's enough to say here that I'd want to oppose her at a very short price, because even the old story about Arc winners never winning at the Breeders' Cup, which is obviously true. Even if she's had a very different preparation, she's only had 2 runs. But again, the Arc was the race that she was being aimed for. So even if it's not as much of an afterthought as it would be for a horse who's had 6 or 7 runs, this wasn't the idea. The Arc was the idea. It's job done. They've won the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe again. Now they're coming here where Golden Horn got beaten, only by the fact that it was soft ground that day. He didn't like it. But so many of these horses have gone there looking almost unbeatable, and they get beaten. So on that basis, if you said to me she's 5-1, I'd be having I'd empty my bank account. But she's not. She's even 6-5. So on that basis, while I have the absolute respect for her and her connections, and I'd love to see her run well, I'm here to give you an opinion, and I'll be betting against her.
I like it. And who will be attracting your betting dollar on the day?
Right. Well, the next thing is that it's Roaring Lion would have done if it was fast ground, but they seem to want to have a go at the Classic, because I think that he reminds me a lot of Falbraff, who you may remember from years ago, who came to the Breeders' Cup. And the question with Roaring Lion would have been, does he get a mile and a half? Well, he placed in the Derby. He's not that bad at a mile and a half, but all his form's short, so only dropped back to a mile. I don't want to waste too much time on this because it doesn't look like he's going to run, but I would have liked him. So what do we back otherwise if we're not there? Well, Monsieur Farb's got a couple of likely suspects, hasn't he? Voldgeist and last year's winner Talismanic. Talismanic seems to be being overlooked again because of a poor run in the Arc where he was caught 3 wide. I mean, he's 15-1 again on the morning line. He loves faster ground, which if it comes up like that at Churchill Downs, that would be helpful. But he went to Hong Kong after the Breeders' Cup last year, where bear in mind he's beaten Highland Drill and Beach Patrol. Probably, these they're good horses. They're not enabled, but they're really good. Highland Drill in particular is a really good horse. And at the time, Beach Patrol was running out of his skin in the States. He's won it once. We know he'll act in America. And Talismanic went to Hong Kong, gave Highland Drill a race then, beat Coffer Stars, the Arc runner-up on the synthetics. I think the last run, I think we can just forget it. His target has been the Breeders' Cup again, so I'd be interested in him at a big price. His stablemate Voldgeist was 4th in the Arc. Now, anyone who likes their statistics and trends, Andre Faber's won the turf 3 times. Twice with 4-year-olds who finished 4th in the Arc. So, but he's had a lot more racing, and his form this year is better than Talismanic's. And he'll be a shorter price in Europe, and I would imagine on the Parimutuel in the States he's going to be a shorter price because he's done more this year. But they're interesting. Again, Magical, Aidan O'Brien's great record in this race. I mean, I can't see Hunting Horn, the stablemate, really showing up. I mean, he just doesn't have it at the same level. But Magical ran really well over a mile and a half. She'll be getting weight as a filly at a decent price. I'd be looking at her too. So there are a few here that are interesting to me. I think of them all at the prices. I mean, I've blipped over Crystal Ocean, who ran the other day in ground that was far too soft for him and was beaten into second by Cracksman over a shorter trip. I've always thought he was more of a stayer, and in our terms, that could be more than a mile and a half. But clearly, his run at Kempton against Enable, well, he was given her £8, and he ran really well. So, I mean, he's Michael Stout, who everyone knows sorry, I have to call him Sir Michael these days. Sir Michael Stout, who everyone knows in America. This is his sort of horse. So there are a lot of good European horses here. I do think that we'll be winning this race. Unlike the mile, I simply cannot see how any of these American-trained horses, short of something going completely wrong, can live with all. Even if Enable doesn't run a race, there are 3 or 4 who I'd be betting against the Americans. I mean, I know the Americans really well. I'm Channel Maker. I was at the races that night when he won and tipped him, so I'm very fond of Channel Makers. Done me a favour in the past. And Robert Bruce, I think is going to have to have fast ground, but I just simply don't think they're good enough on this occasion. And if it was just one, I'd say, well, we've seen them mess up in the past. But there's 4 or 5 here from Europe who I could see beating these Americans. So I think we're going to have a European winner. I'm not going to be backing Enable myself. I'm not trying to sit on the fence. I have mentioned 4 or 5. I wouldn't want to put anybody off. But if you're putting me on the spot, which of these would I be betting today? I'd be betting Talismanic, win, place, and show.
I hear the logic given the price. I just am concerned about the current form. And I do think you can make the real argument. And I was somebody who tipped him last year and had every reason to want to go with confirmation bias and talk about how great the run was. He might have been 3rd best in the race. So I was just worried that in a deeper running, with not maybe as strong preparation. But you make a good point. This was the target all along. And when you're talking about a number like 15-1, if it's there on the day, I certainly wouldn't talk anybody off. And I think that there is, beyond that that funny statistical case for Waldgeist, there could be a lot there off that arc run. It's going to be fascinating. And how funny would it be if that Kempton race, I mean, it already is funny. I'm going to be writing a piece about the preps for the Breeders' Cup Turf, and I'm going to be writing about a Kempton all-weather race.
Well, I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, it's strange enough in the States to have a horse coming off those synthetic tracks to run a big race on the turf, but we all know that they're closer than going on the dirt. But in Europe, there's still people who consider these synthetic tracks to be close to dirt racing. You know, and it's not true at all. But that's not the point. I mean, for us to have this sort of preparation, I mean, John Gosden clearly knows these things inside out. But it was very, very odd. It's just, I mean, we're getting better horses running on the synthetic tracks these days. Clearly, well, they don't get any better than Enable and Crystal Ocean. But you know, we are getting better horses running in those kinds of races at Kempton now. But yes, I mean, historically, it's just an absolute outlier. It's just weird.
It's funny, and there's a tangent to go on here, and we're not going to fully do it because I promised you, I've already kept you longer than I promised you I would. But it is funny when you look at the Breeders' Cup Classic at all the horses with turf form running on the dirt in there, and then we've got the synthetic form showing up in the turf. There's some lesson to be learned that on a future appearance on the DRF Players podcast, we'll go into depth about with your knowledge of racing worldwide. We might be able to do some theorizing about, but I can't let you go before we talk about Roaring Lion's chance in the Classic. Well, I'll just ask it like this. Does he have one?
Well, this is the sort of thing that's going to come back to bite me on the rear end, isn't it? But I honestly can't see him winning the Classic. I love the fact that they want to have a go, but it's a shot to nothing, to use a phrase, because he's already the top 3-year-old in Europe on turf. He's done everything. He's going to be retired. Why not go and do something that no one's ever done, I guess is the thinking. Imagine if he was to win on dirt, his stallion profile in the States is already going to be a great stallion because of what he's done on the turf. But, you know, you don't need to be a bloodstock or the pedigree expert to see that Kitten's Joy doesn't have a lot of success on the dirt, sure. Admittedly from not that many attempts. They don't run that often, do they? He's a turf sire. He doesn't get that many really good horses that have tried, but presumably if they were that good, they would try a few more on the dirt. It's hard to see. Even John Gosden is talking about it, saying the right things, like it's a real sporting attempt. But time and again, we've seen these European horses who really don't have dirt breeding, and they don't run that well, do they, really, in the Classic? I mean, really good horses like Galileo, Aidan O'Brien's been trying this for years, and we've got very close, but with horses with the right sort of breeding. Giant's Causeway, who's now a great dirt sire. Even Declaration of War, who was nowhere near that sort of level in Europe, but I mean, he had the pedigree, didn't he? So I've got to be honest, I don't really fancy Roaring Lion, but I hope he runs well, and I will be cheering him if he's in contention, and I'd love to have egg on my face after that. But of the 3 Europeans we've got, 2 of whom you guys in America know as well as I do. In fact, you've seen more of Mendelssohn than I have.
Right.
But you know, it's. I mean, I would prefer their chances, frankly.
I'll push my luck and ask you one more question, because before we came on the air, you revealed that you've been to racetracks all over the place, and you count Saratoga as your favorite, which is obviously a place near and dear to me, my other residence besides Brooklyn, New York. Just curious what it is about that place that stands out to you, that makes you hold it in those lofty high.
Well, I could throw adjectives at Saratoga. It's beguiling, enchanting, magical. I was taken in by the whole scene of being. I travelled up on the Amtrak. I've been a couple of times now, but the first time I travelled up on the Amtrak up the Hudson River, went to this lovely town, which is very laid back anyway. But the racing is at the centre of it. You could walk down to the track. Then you've got the best stables on the East Coast, with the odd one coming in from the West. So you're looking at good horses. It reeks of history, but not in a sort of stultifying. Sniffy way. Look, I mean, to put it, Saratoga is old money, sort of posh American racing, but compared to someone who's used to Europe, it's not stuffy in the slightest. Okay, we know how to do that, and it can be a bit much sometimes, and that's not me. It's not like that at all. There's the sort of history that I like, and the tradition of you walk around the corner and you're walking down the training track that Secretariats walk down. The things that this is American racing's heartland. And to me, Glorious Goodwood is a great meeting in England, and it's beautiful. But to me, the level of competition at Saratoga, it's like having Glorious Goodwood for 6 weeks, which we of course never do. Our race meetings never last longer than 5 days, and often only 2. But it's but to be at a course like that, I mean, if I could, I'd be there for the whole summer, and just decamp my family over there for the school summer holidays and live there and just go to the races every day. It's just lovely. It's wonderful, and of course it is. This is important. You can have a wonderful setting and everything else, but it is the pinnacle. The racing is just fantastic.
That's great. Well, there's a spot for you at the Paddock Bar, my table every day, if you decide to make the journey over one of these summers. Nick Godfrey, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
And there you have it. That's it for this episode of the DRF Players Podcast, little European special related to this year's Breeders' Cup. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank JK, as always. I want to thank Nick Luck and Nick Godfrey for taking time out of their busy days. Producer Craig, producer AJ, Willie Nile. For more of his music, which you hear up top, check out willienile.com. Travis Stone, the voice of the Kentucky Derby, great race caller over at Churchill Downs. Of course, most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. You make the show fun to do. Keep the questions coming. Hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Looms Boldly. He's at UT Big Hair. You can also email us, podcast@drf.com. We will be back on Tuesday. It's EquestriaCon. It will be a taped show with some special guests. Should be a lot of fun nonetheless, but we'll be back then. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.